Let's talk about Khabib Nurmagomedov, a real superstar in the MMA world. Khabib came into the sport to show everyone who he is, and boy, did he do just that. He became the world champion and defended his title 3 times. Plus, he's been in some of the biggest fights in UFC history. This guy is a legend, Khabib's miracle. Now, in MMA, it's rare to see what you'd call a miracle. It's a tough sport where fighters show their strength, keep going even when it's hard, and never give up. But miracles? They're not something you usually see in the octagon. We all know how hard the game is. It can be really tough on the fighters. Everyone gets hurt or loses at some point, no matter how good they are. That's just how it goes. But Khabib, he's different. He's been called the most dominant fighter ever. When he fights, it's like he feels sorry for his opponents. Nobody seems as unbeatable as Khabib. So who's the greatest of all time in MMA? That's a big question. We've seen unbeatable fighters like Floyd Mayweather in boxing, but Khabib's something else in MMA. Khabib was undefeated when he joined the UFC. Lots of people thought he might lose eventually, but he never did. He never even came close to losing. You know, in MMA, it's almost impossible to have a perfect career. The sport is just too tough, but once in a while you might see something amazing, something like a miracle. And Khabib's career was exactly that. He went through all his fights without losing, something super rare in MMA. It's like he was blessed by the MMA gods or something. He made it through the lightweight division, which is full of tough fighters, without a single defeat. That's why people talk about Khabib's career as something really special, almost like a miracle in the world of MMA. Michael Johnson. In 2016, Khabib Nurmagomedov was the talk of the town in the UFC's lightweight division. He was unbeaten with a record of 23 wins and no losses, and everyone thought he was the guy to watch. The lightweight division is full of tough fighters, but Khabib was like the king of the hill. So there was this big event, UFC 205, at Madison Square Garden, and Khabib was set to fight Michael Johnson. This fight was decided pretty quickly, but it was a big deal. People were saying it would show just how good Khabib really was. Michael Johnson was hoping Khabib had worked on more than just his wrestling skills. He wanted a good fight and even predicted he'd knock Khabib out. On the day of the weigh-in, there was some drama. Khabib got into a bit of a shouting match with Conor McGregor, another big name in the UFC. It was like a scene from a movie, with these two tough guys facing off. Then came fight night at UFC 205. Khabib was in the spotlight and everyone was watching. The fight with Michael Johnson started, and wow, Khabib was incredible. He didn't just fight well, he talked to Johnson while he was fighting him. That's something you don't see every day. He was punching and elbowing and all the while chatting away. It was like he was in a league of his own. Khabib dominated the fight. He showed everyone that he was more than just a wrestler. He was a complete fighter, tough and smart. People who hadn't paid much attention to Khabib before were now sitting up and taking notice. His win over Johnson wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. He was telling the world that he was the fighter to beat in the lightweight division. That fight at UFC 205 was a big moment for Khabib. He showed his skills, his confidence, and his unique style. It was clear that Khabib was a special fighter, and this fight was a key part of his journey to becoming one of the greatest in the UFC. Tony Ferguson. After Khabib's big fight, he showed a lot of respect for his opponent, Michael Johnson. He even thanked him backstage for taking the fight. Johnson later said on Instagram that he thought Khabib would be a champ one day. That's pretty cool, right? But things weren't all smooth for Khabib. He had a tough time during fight week. He had been hurt and couldn't fight for 2 years, and now he had problems making the right weight for the fight. People in the UFC world were getting frustrated with him. There were even talks that Khabib might quit fighting. He was in pain, maybe with his kidneys or liver, and it was tough for him. But Khabib wasn't going to give up. No way. He didn't want to leave fighting on a sad note. He still had big dreams in the UFC. Then there was Tony Ferguson, another top fighter. He was the interim champ, which means he was kind of like a temporary champion. Khabib knew he had to do something really amazing to show everyone he was still one of the best. Most people were not being very nice to Khabib, especially after he loved eating tiramisu, a yummy dessert. But Edson Barboza, another fighter, was kind to Khabib. He said nice things about him and treated him like a true fighter. Barboza knew that if Khabib signed a contract to fight, he would definitely show up and give it his all. He said their fight would be a great show. So even when things got tough, Khabib kept going. He had to prove he was still a great fighter. And with people like Barboza believing in him, Khabib was ready to show everyone what he could do in the octagon. That's the spirit of a true fighter, never giving up, no matter what. Edson Barboza. Khabib, who was really good at wrestling, faced Edson Barboza, a guy known for his quick kicks. In their fight, Khabib was like a machine. He didn't care if Barboza kicked or punched. he just kept going. The fight was tough for 3 rounds, and Khabib was winning big time. Barboza tried his best and landed a couple of good kicks, but Khabib wasn't bothered at all. He won the fight easily and showed everyone he was still the top fighter in the lightweight division. Barboza felt really sad about losing because he had trained so hard. Even months later, he was still trying to understand how he lost. Next up, everyone was super excited for Khabib to fight Tony Ferguson. This fight was going to be huge, and it was supposed to happen at UFC 223. But then, something crazy happened. Ferguson got hurt by accident. He tripped over some wires and hurt his knee. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor, another famous fighter, was watching all this. Max Holloway was supposed to replace Ferguson, but he couldn't fight because of medical reasons. So, they picked Al Iaquinta to fight Khabib. Al was supposed to fight someone else, but they needed him for this big fight. The fight between Khabib and Al was a bit strange. Some people thought Khabib didn't do his best because he didn't finish Al off. But Khabib still won by a lot, and he became the new lightweight champion. Khabib was really nice to Al after the fight, calling him tough for stepping in at the last minute. So now, Khabib was the champion, and a huge fight was waiting for him. He was going to face Conor McGregor, the biggest star in MMA. This was going to be the most exciting fight ever. Conor McGregor. Alright, let's talk about the big UFC fight between Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. They used to be sort of okay with each other, but things got really heated when they both wanted the 155-pound gold belt. Things really blew up when Khabib slapped Artem Lobov, a friend of Conor. Conor flew all the way to defend Artem and wasn't shy about saying he'd beat Khabib badly. Conor kept throwing words at Khabib, promising to knock him out big time. But Khabib, known for keeping his cool, lost his temper a few times because Conor was really disrespectful. Conor said mean things about Khabib's home, his culture, and his family. The big fight happened at UFC 229. Khabib stayed calm and focused, especially in the first round. He kept Conor on the ground, making him super tired. Then, in the second round, Khabib landed a huge punch that knocked Conor, who's known as a great striker, down. After that, Khabib took Conor to the ground and was really in control. But after the fight, things got crazy. There was a big fight in the cage with a lot of people jumping in. It was wild and showed how intense things can get in the UFC. This fight was a big deal because it was between two of the best fighters and everyone was talking about it. Khabib showed his strength and strategy, and Conor showed his fighting spirit. It was one of those fights that people will remember for a long time. After the big fight at UFC 229, things got really wild. Khabib, who just won against Conor McGregor, got super angry at one of Conor's team members. He jumped out of the fighting ring and ran after the guy. While this was happening, two of Khabib's friends jumped in and went after Conor. It was total chaos. Even with all that craziness, the big news was that Khabib had beaten Conor. This win made Khabib super famous, but because of the fight after the match, he couldn't fight for a whole year. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next with the undefeated champion, Dustin Poirier. Khabib had another big fight coming up, but this time his dad, Abdulmanap, was watching from the corner. Khabib was ready to defend his title again at UFC 254, and he was looking super strong. After the fight, Khabib and his opponent, Dustin Poirier, showed each other a lot of respect, but Dustin was really sad about losing. He said it was going to bother him for a long time. Everyone agreed that Khabib was in a league of his own. It wasn't just about being strong, it was his perfect technique that made him so good. But then, there was a new challenge. The world was dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything was changing, including UFC fights. Khabib was stuck in Russia and couldn't come to the United States for his next fight. So the UFC planned an interim title fight without him. It was a tough time, especially after Khabib lost his dad. But Khabib came back for UFC 254, ready to face Justin Gaethje, one of the toughest strikers in the division. Justin had just won a big fight and was seen as a serious threat. He knew fighting Khabib on the ground was dangerous and wanted to avoid it at all costs. The fight was huge. If Justin could beat Khabib, he would make history by defeating two big fighters back-to-back. Everyone was watching to see if Justin could pull off an upset and change the game. It was a big moment in UFC, showing how fighters keep pushing themselves and facing new challenges. Khabib walked into the cage, just like always, looking strong and focused. But this time, it was different. He was dealing with a lot of sadness and stress because his dad wasn't there with him. Khabib always looked tough, but no one knew what was going on in his mind. In the fight, Khabib was amazing. He fought smart, thinking about his family watching. He didn't want to hurt his opponent too badly in front of his own parents. Before, he had made Conor McGregor give up in the fourth round and Dustin Poirier in the third. Now, he faced Justin Gaethje and made him give up in the second round. It was like Khabib was getting better and better with each fight. After the fight, everyone found out that Khabib had been really sick. and even had a broken foot. But he fought anyway and won. Justin Gaethje said Khabib was just too strong that night. Khabib beat all these tough fighters and showed how strong he was. His last fight was even more amazing than the ones before. Now everyone was wondering, how do we think about Khabib? Is he the greatest fighter ever? Maybe not, because there are other great fighters like John Jones and GSP. But Khabib was like a force of nature, something really special. Khabib never lost a fight, never even got hurt much, and left fighting while he was still the best. He was one of a kind, and we might never see anyone like him again. Even if he kept fighting and winning, we would still want to see more of him. Khabib was just that amazing and left us all wanting to see what he would do next.